Thank you, Maureen, for your introduction and for the opportunity of being a part of this wonderful conference that you all have put together, and also for the opportunity of joining my friend Al Brandano in a concurrent presentation here. So it's a pleasure to do that. Al and I have been knowing each other for a long time, and just happy to be able to present together. Al, good to see you.
Thank you, Dr. Potts. Always an honor.
Well, what I thought I would do in my part of the presentation here to start off with is to tell you a little bit about sort of my background, especially as regards my dad, Lester, who had Alzheimer's disease and who amazingly became a watercolor artist after the diagnosis. I suspect he was always a watercolor artist, and neither he nor anyone else knew it until the diagnosis. And then sort of to move into a little bit of our experience with working with people living with dementia, and using the arts as therapy for people living with dementia, capturing their stories, learning to love and share their stories, and honoring them in doing so. Next slide, please. What this is really about, it's about honoring the person. And so you'll see a recurrent theme running through both Al's and my presentation, parts of this presentation, regarding validating and honoring a human being that is living with dementia, and of course also their care partners and families. So that will be a theme that we'll take home, and we'll talk about some ways that we all can do that. So hopefully at the end of our presentation today, we will be able to discuss the power of the arts and creativity to tap into persistent personhood and enable its expression. We'll talk about a concept we call pillars of personhood, and give examples of how care models may be built upon this collection of self-traits that persists in a human being, despite the fact that they have dementia. We'll explain the technology of life story elicitation and preservation, and talk about how this is an essential component of person-centered care models that are compassionate and empathetic. And then we'll discuss some specific examples and stories elicited, preserved, and shared through this paradigm. Next slide, please. I always start any talk that I give with a dedication to my father, and I'm going to do that. We briefly mentioned disclosures here that you can read that are really not really pertinent to this talk, but we always share those. Next slide. My father, Lester, was the best man I've ever known. You see a picture of him there. He was an inspiration to me and so many others, and I'm very thankful to have had him as a father. My mother is my mother. I love the quote by Picasso, which says, "The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away." Well, my father had many gifts, and he gave them away freely. One gift that he didn't know he had was the gift of artistic expression, which may turn out to be his greatest talent. And unbelievably, this is a talent that emerged after the diagnosis of Alzheimer's and has served as the inspiration and the touchstone for me in my practice of neurology and in all the work that we do through our foundation. Lynn Castile Harper has summarized art amazingly well with this quote: "Art is an appealing." I think that says so much, and it really speaks for my dad's story. I think that my father was painting and sharing his story through art in an effort to keep from vanishing. And so stories are something that helps to preserve personhood and help us all from vanishing, and they can be shared with our loved ones. Next slide, please. So I'd like to take you through a little bit of Dad's story. Dad, at about the age of 70, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He had been having some symptoms prior to that quite honestly, I feel I had missed or had been in denial about. Some things that my mother had told me were going on at home, a couple of fender benders. And after retirement in a second job, he began to have some problems on the job that I didn't know about initially. But a friend of mine who was his supervisor and who was an attorney met with me one day to describe. It turns out Dad was locking keys in cars, losing cars. He was parking cars for a physician's office building. And it turns out he was losing some of those cars, locking keys in cars, and his coworkers were very irritated with him. Now, this was a man who grew up sawmilling, who had an impeccable work ethic, and who continued to work all his life. He had never failed at an occupational task, and now he was failing at that task. So his supervisor met with me and told me about these things. And I called Dad that day. Dad was losing his job because he couldn't keep up any longer. And we talked. And he said, son, I'm trying to not take this too hard. Your mother and I are just going to enjoy our retirement. And I said, Dad, I think that's what you should do. You've worked hard all your lives. That was one of the hardest days of our lives, because that's when we realized, reality is showing us that Dad has dementia. He soon afterward got a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, and he had a rough time, as Mother did also, in the early stages of that, because he was so capable, and he was becoming inept in some ways, and so this was very hard to see and struggle that way. Along came an adult daycare program in our town called Caring Days, which is a wonderful facility, and the opportunity for Dad to attend there a couple days a week, which he did. And while there, he met many people who would love him and would be family for him for the next several years. One of those people was an artist named George Parker, whom you see in the upper right corner of the PowerPoint slide. And George Parker taught his art to people like my dad. He was not an art therapist. However, he had an innate talent to share his artistic gift. So George had found his gift and was giving it away. And one of the people that received it was Lester. Next slide. Well, the amazing thing that was happening when Dad was painting, and of course this was at a time when short-term memory was failing, but also language was failing. Dad's ability to tell his story, to express himself verbally was limited and getting worse all the time. And so I think the art gave him an outlet through which to share his emotions and his story and his inner self. And so he did this. And what I'd like to show you in the next few slides as expressive of Dad's story is his early childhood memories that came out in the art. So one of the things that Dad loved, he was a woodworker, he loved to build things, and he built birdhouses for people in the community and gave them to folks and have put them up in their yards, actually. So when he couldn't build birdhouses anymore, he started painting them. And you can see in these two paintings of Dad's, you can see a birdhouse motif. I guess he was continuing to think about the shapes of those birdhouses as he painted them in these paintings. So part of his life story that's getting out through the art. We can advance to the next slide, please. Ruth Abraham says visual art will reflect its maker. And certainly Dad's art reflected its maker. We actually have highlighted a couple of those birdhouse motifs, and you'll see with one other click the birdhouse motif there. In this slide, you can see fences. And Dad loved fences. Dad built many a fence. You can see in the lower left-hand corner a photograph of Dad's family in the 1930s standing in front of the old home place with a fence that he used to talk about. Well, as Dad advanced in Alzheimer's and had discovered his art, he painted fences. He was a man of boundaries of fences. And so these are expressed in his art. Next slide, please. This is a very special story to our family. Dad had a very good friend named Albert Porter. You can see him in the photo next to Dad on the left, Albert on the right. These men sawmilled together and continued to be lifelong friends, very close brotherly type friends. And really they had worked together, and so they knew each other very well and depended on each other. As a matter of fact, in my life, Dad told me more than one time, if anything ever happens to me or happens to our family, find Mr. Albert and he will help. Next slide. In late Alzheimer's disease, Dad brought home this little canvas painting, watercolor, of a white man and a black man pulling a crosscut saw. We all knew who it was, but Dad couldn't tell us at the time. So I said simply, Dad, is that your buddy, Mr. Albert? And he put his hand on Mr. Albert's figure and cried. Of course it was Mr. Albert. So one of the things that this taught me as a neurologist, as a physician, is the power of relationships that have formed early in life and have been loving, dependable relationships. Those can be drawn upon in later life and can be a source of comfort and strength. And I think that's exactly what Dad was doing with Albert's relationship, pulling upon it in his dark times, and he painted it for all of us to see. Next slide. This is Dad's most well-known painting. I guess I should say, when Dad started painting, we were all so amazed. In fact, everyone was so amazed by it that we were telling everyone the story. And so Dad became sort of a local celebrity around the Tuscaloosa, Alabama area. I started writing poetry because Dad was painting. I'd never written a poem in my life. But I found that his artistic expression enabled me to find my own art. So I started writing, still do as a matter of fact. But after I'd written a number of poems, I painted Dad's art with my poetry, and my family and I produced a book called The Broken Jar to give back to the adult daycare program for their benefit. The Broken Jar was discovered by the American Academy of Neurology, and I got to be invited to be an advocate for people living with Alzheimer's and their care partners through an advocacy training program that Maureen mentioned, the Donald M. Palatucci Advocacy Program. And that enabled me to do a lot of what I'm talking about today. But the point is that paintings like The Broken Jar are the reason that or paintings like the blue collage, are the reason that happened. So in the next slide, which we can advance to now, I'm going to show you some images that explain what's in this collage. Now, Dad painted this collage late in life, and he had almost completely lost ability at this time, and certainly could not relate any of his story or history for us. But in the blue collage, we see, for instance, his father's hat on top of a cross that is coming out of a high-top shoe with a cross-cut saw coming out of the shoe. Now, you can see pictures of his father, his high-top shoes, his hat, his mother and father down at the bottom, saws, sawmill scenes. This is an abstract image of Dad's father and of his family that he painted in late-stage Alzheimer's. You can also see the birdhouses, you can see fences, you can see rocks and leaves. This is really a painting of Lester. This is sort of his life story in a painting at a time when he could not get it out any longer. More than any other image I've ever looked at as a physician, this has changed my outlook, because now I look for the person that's still there despite the condition and try to validate that human being. The blue collage has been shown all over the world, and I think it's because it is a triumphant example of the inner self making itself known. Next slide, please. Well, obviously, Dad's art really got a hold of us, and it touched us deeply, but it made me think about story, humanity, the person, relationships. the persistent self despite disease, and how we reach that, and how we honor that, and how we let that person express what's inside, and that can be a tool for living well with these conditions. And so we began to explore the use of art and creativity and story in persons living with dementia. And I certainly am indebted to many, many people who have researched this and who have published about this and who have utilized various forms of creativity and life story. We met Al on with all of this. We had formed our foundation, Cognitive Dynamics, after Dad came in 2007. And I had done my advocacy training, and we were trying to develop some programming that would make use of Dad's story, but also use the power of story and art. And so in the next few slides, I want to talk a little bit about what we've learned specifically in this part of the talk through art therapy, because we have used art therapy paradigms to treat people living with dementia now for the past years, and have learned so much in doing that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I love the quote from the Ground Zero there, the One World Center in New York. No day shall erase you from the memory of time. And I believe that's true, and that's what we're aspiring for here. Next slide. So art has many benefits, and Gene Cohen, who was a geriatric psychiatrist, who was very foundationally important in terms of a lot of the research on creativity, said that creativity is chocolate for the brain, and there are many reasons for that. It facilitates the development and preservation of visuospatial and fine motor skills. And of course, we know we lose some of those in certain dementias. It increases our ability to abstract. It helps us lessen the effects of stress. It helps to preserve patience, attention, and self-regulation. It makes connections between unrelated things and fosters communication. It activates our pleasure centers in the brain, and it engenders a flow state, which is that state of intense concentration where time seems to stand still when we are very focused on what we're doing. And by the way, when I'm talking about art and creativity, I'm talking about all kinds of creativity in art: music, dance, combining all this with reminiscence, movement, poetry, expressive art of all kinds. Next slide, please. I love this slide because I was trying to determine, or trying to exhibit for you here, which parts of the brain are involved in artistic creativity, art making, and viewing. And I've highlighted those in yellow. Well, the funny thing about it is they're all involved. So one of the things that creativity does is it pulls in many different parts of the brain and sort of helps them to work together. So literally, to talk about parts that are involved with arts and creativity, we've got to talk about the whole brain, talk about it holistically. Next slide, please. So in particular, I want to focus on the power of the arts and creativity to help us express our selfhood and to help us weave our story out, as it did for Dad. All paths lead to the same goal: to convey to others what we are, said Pablo Neruda. Next slide. So we've both tried to combine scientific approaches, neuroscience, but we've also tried to combine philosophical approaches to this matter of selfhood and art and story. And we love philosopher Soren Kierkegaard's thoughts about this. He said the true self is discovered by turning inward to seek coherence of past and future. And certainly Al Brandano can tell that helping to form a coherent past and future in the present is what storytelling is about. The self is a work of art, Kierkegaard said. It's to be shaped. And inner unity is required to make sense of life's narrative and story. So art and creativity help us to provide that unity. art matters, says Kierkegaard, primarily with this project of selfhood. It matters because it helps us shore up the self. And so this function of art may be particularly important in persons living with Alzheimer's and other dementias, because many of them have told me that there are times when there's some self wanes. I have a friend, Brian LeBlanc, who's living with early onset Alzheimer's. Many of you may have seen his podcasts and talks. But he talks about this brain fog that he has at times when he really sort of forgets a lot of his personhood. But it comes back, and the ways it comes back are through loved ones, people loving him, people reminding him of his story, creativity, arts, and some other moves. So I really think the relational milieu in which our persons living with dementia are surrounded is very important. And certainly Thomas Kitwood's work in Britain talking about the relational aspects of the self and about how important it is for someone to have a supportive milieu to help build up the selfhood. Next slide, please. So Abraham and Haas-Cohen Finley talk about art therapy supporting meaning and bypassing verbal brain function. And this was very important in Dad's case. It can provide a means of expressing emotion, bolstering the self-image, as we talked about. And one of the things that's very powerful is that art therapy and creativity with accessing autobiographical memory. And autobiographical memory is that collection of events, past going all the way up through the present, that helps us know who we are, that helps to form our life story. Well, the arts and creativity and reminiscence are directly access that part of the brain where autobiographical memory is stored. So the arts and creativity are very important to get memory out. Art making synthesizes and integrates psychological, emotional, and cognitive functions so that it helps the brain function as one organ. Next slide, please. The process of art creating transforms the space and canvas symbolic self spaces. So in other words, art reveals the interior of the artist. And the right hemisphere holds the social emotional self and is less adversely affected by Alzheimer's pathology. And we can actually directly access that part of the brain through the arts and the expressive arts. Music, of course, is wonderful at this, and there's much research about this and many documentaries about this. I don't know if you've seen Glenn Campbell, I'll Be Me, which is the story of Glenn Campbell on his last concert tour that his family took him on after he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And the power of the music to bring back Glenn. Next slide, please. So persons with dementia have an interior subjective world, and they may be overwhelmed by the loss of verbal skills, but they can give voice to this inner world through the arts, Abraham. When disability limits language, images become very significant as a means to heal through the communication of emotional material. Next slide, please. So I want to move into pillars of personhood as a way to think about the persistent self traits that we can access through the arts and creativity. So all of us have self-defining attributes which are enduring even in the face of dementia. And these attributes can be more difficult to identify when cognitive faculties are being lost. But it's important to understand that they are still there if we know how to reach them. Learning about and developing an appreciation for these pillars of personhood will aid in person-centered care delivery, in care partnerships, and in relationship building. Next slide, please. So when we talk about pillars of personhood, we're talking about things like Mr. Jones's gift for coaching Little League baseball. That's a pillar of his personhood. And if we know that, we can access that pillar by talking about sports, talking about mentoring youth, and that sort of thing. When we get Mr. Jones's life story, if he's living in an assisted living facility and we document that life story, we can then access that as staff. Another pillar might be the fact that Mrs. Smith was many, many years. So that when we have sing-alongs at the assisted living facility, Mrs. Smith always wants to get up and lead the chorus. And we're going to let her do that because she's accessing certainly a pillar of her personhood in doing that. Those are some examples of pillars. We generally talk about physical pillars, psychological pillars, relational pillars, and spiritual pillars. And so we can think through a person's life and sense of self and tease out those individuals. And I find it helpful to speak with family members about this, to find out about why a loved one was loved. You know, what made you fall in love with your wife to start with? Oh, these are the things that did. Well, those are the things they're still there. They may be having a hard time getting out, but they're still there, despite the fact that she's got Alzheimer's. So some practice recommendations for person-centered care in which these pillars of personhood can play a role were delineated by Dr. Sam Fazio and others. First of all is knowing the person that's living with dementia, recognizing and supporting ongoing opportunities for meaningful engagement, building and nurturing authentic, caring relationships, creating and maintaining a supportive community for individuals, families, and staff, and then evaluating those practices regularly and making appropriate changes. Next slide, please. Maya Angelou said, and I think this is a very, very powerful quote and so true, there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. People living with dementia have an untold story. Actually, many of us have an untold story. And we have to have compassionate listeners that know how to access that story. We have to feel that we're in a trusted, safe space so that we can let our story come out. And we have to tag into these stories in certain ways. Next slide, please. So we've created a program called Bringing Art to Life. And in Bringing Art to Life, we pair students with people living with dementia. And we teach the students, first of all, about dementia, cognitive impairment. We teach them about art therapy. We teach them how to interact and communicate with people living with dementia. We talk to them about pillars of personhood. And then we all get together in an interactive art therapy environment, a practical, and we create art together under the auspices of an art therapist. And over the course of a semester, and these are both, can be high school students, they can be undergraduate students, major, they can be medical students, nursing, social work, any kind. What happens is that life stories come out, number one, great art comes out, number two, but the most important thing is relationships are built, intergenerational relationships that really transform the kids. And many of them have written about this. We've done research on the program, and we know that measures of empathy improve through this interaction. We know that the kids are, the stigma about elderhood and dementia is lessened. And we have more kids that want to go into, for instance, geriatric care or gerontology because of the program. So the relationships are the powerful part. But we have this beautiful art, and we have people telling their stories through art, some of which you can see right here. Next slide, please. So we have these intense moments of connection. We have these intense moments of connection between our students and our persons living with dementia that come out during the art therapy. And I want to share a couple of those with you. In the bottom right corner, you'll see Mr. Bobby. Mr. Bobby was one of our participants, and we happened to be making some art one day that was decorating pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns. And the students happened to ask Mr. Bobby, "What's your favorite holiday?" And he said, "A day like today." Of course, that wasn't the holiday. We were talking about holidays, but this idea that Mr. Bobby is in the moment and enjoying the present with the students, and said, "A day like today is my basically favorite day," really touched our hearts. We had one little lady you see in the top middle left, Miss Dot, who no matter how many times she saw us, always said, "A friendly smile and a handshake don't cost a dime, baby." And she would say that 15 times a session. But it was a great way for the students to learn how to always be receptive for that, to act like it was the first time they had heard that, and to be a great listener. And of course, we loved working with Ms. Dot. And in the middle bottom is a beautiful scene that I'll always remember of us bouncing balloons at the end of art therapy, which went to show me that we don't have to have a structured activity all the time. We can have spontaneous interaction and play, because it's important for us all to remember how to play, even if we're old and living with dementia. And so that's what we did that day. It meant a great deal to all of us. Next slide, please. And let's go to the next slide. So at this time, I would like to basically summarize by saying that the arts and creativity have great power, not only in my father's life, but in the lives of many others, in fact, all of us. And through the power of creativity, we can access our autobiographical memory, which is where we store the life story. And we can create a narrative, even if we have dementia, by accessing this through relationships and creativity, art, music, reminiscence. Also, pets do it, kids do it, nature does it, things that make us feel good. So I would like to turn over now to my friend Al, who is going to talk about the power of the voice and his great experience with the Voice Library in helping people by preserving their stories. So Al, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Potts, and thank you, Maureen, and for the whole event today, for this opportunity. We're really thrilled to be invited. One of the things for me that's the most exciting is always discovering something new and enjoying something new about people in their lives, and you really don't know that until you spend some time with them, right? So that a loved one can really hear your story and the people who live them. It's truly the most priceless gift of all, to comfort, to inspire, to teach, and entertain. So I hope moving at this part of the presentation will be a little bit more in that perspective, so that we can enjoy storytelling a little bit and maybe tell a little story on my part and a little story on yours. So Maureen, the next slide, please. I start off always with the battery to your brain is really your ear and not your eyes. And what story and whose voice would you really love to listen to? And I'll give you a minute to think about that, because it's really powerful. Who would you like to listen to if you could again? Just for a minute, if you could just think about it. It's pretty powerful. But I think Longfellow really said it best. The human voice is the organ of the soul. And especially today, we've been over-mediarized, right? There's so much video out there. And as you know, video comes into your eyes, ends up in your frontal lobes, and it kind of sits there waiting for something. And I use this analogy in the early 1900s. It was silent movies. In the beginning, people went to them all the time, but they didn't come back. And the producers were wondering why, what was going on, until they added music. And the music was the train running down the tracks, and they had the violin going, and it added the tone, the vibration, and the intonation that everything needs, right? To be human, we need to have that vibration, and that's really what voice is like. And we noticed that a lot right after 9/11. Our little company started to get really busy, and people were asking us how they can capture their mother's voice, their father's voice, or other stories. And what we learned from them is that they were capturing them, but some didn't want to listen right now. It was just too strong or too powerful. And then some wanted to listen immediately. And it's interesting how people have that perspective, how powerful it is for everybody. So one of the big things for us, if you think about the brain, we like to think about it as the brain is the palette, and your words, your tone, your intonation is really the paint, right? That kind of like figures out where you are. So if you were to say to somebody, tell me about your White House and my White House, especially if you have a Southern accent, would be totally different, because your mind is, you see a Southern estate, it's a different. And so this is why, having the brain listen longer and become that part of that palette, and the words become the paint. I mean, let's face it, the first thing that happens in vitro, the first sense we have is sound, right? And it's actually the last one to leave us when we die. So it is incredibly powerful. Caregivers, I want to share a story that we just heard recently. A family unfortunately had to put one of their loved ones in assisted living. And when they were there, they have some dementia. And at night, they were having a very difficult time. And what they shared with us, they used the voice library. The nurses there were able, and the caregivers were able to dial up a phone and let them listen to their loved ones' stories, right? Their aunts, their uncles, whoever it was, and it was able to settle them. And it was really rewarding for us to hear that, because that's exactly what we're all about, is trying to find really the power of the voice and the treasure of a story again, to keep people who they are and to find out who they are. So one of the things we've learned in COVID, or during this COVID time, was stress, isolation, and loneliness. Those three things were actually prevalent in another thing that we learned. And it actually is the prelude, unfortunately, to suicide. And how we know that, 7 years ago, almost 8 now, we were invited to the Pentagon to work with Colonel Philbrook and the Suicide Prevention Task Force. And it happened totally by accident. It was an amazing event for us, because I couldn't imagine going there. It was so incredible, and especially enabled to help people. But a woman came into our office, and her name was Claire, and I didn't know, but she suffered from myasthenia gravis, which I really didn't even know what that was at the time. And it is a disease that affects your voice, right? And what she did is she had her daughters read Goodnight Moon to her husband in Afghanistan at night, and other books. And she wanted the voice library for other military families. And, we were like, wow, that's beautiful. And we were unable to provide 300 subscriptions that they wanted, but she went out with us and fundraised. And as we fundraised through the whole event, we were able to do that. We're really proud of it. So, but it's one thing we learned, that how stress, isolation, and loneliness play a huge part in people's lives. Next slide, please. Best practices, right? How do you really capture a story? What's the real essence of doing this? And, we've done this for over 11 years. So for us, we found some really interesting ways. But one of the things that I want to start with is there's always some key questions, right? There's a key question. And one of the things we use in our storytelling and getting people to tell their story is Viktor Frankl's 5 questions that he asks on how people really survive. And it becomes very powerful. And so that's our starting point. And the other things you want to ask someone before they get started is, what don't you want to talk about, right? You want to be sure when you talk to somebody what they don't want to talk about, as well as what they do want to talk about. The other thing is we use the 5 senses: smell, taste, touch, hear, and what did you feel? A great interview involves just asking that question. They're in charge, they're going, and just let them go. And then when they get tripped up or they don't realize, then it's smell. What did you smell? What did you hear? What did you feel? The other big part of the equation is music of the day, the music that will stimulate them from that time in their life. And the second part of it will be pictures, still pictures, that helps them to create and to capture that where they were at the time. One of the things that we actually really tell you we believe you shouldn't do is use video. And the reason for not using video is because what happens is it becomes a distraction, especially for older people. They don't like the way they look, they don't like, and they start acting, and you don't get something that's really real. And our platform at the Voice Library, what we do is we use, you capture the voice first, and then you add the pictures after. So someone's more than willing to take a picture after once they get to know you, right? And it should be done over something like coffee or an event so that people feel comfortable. And I can show you for us, we have our subscription box. When it comes something like this, little box, right? But one of the things we did after 11 years of learning how to do it is we added activities. So we have 9 activities right now that when you pick up a subscription, they're all in there. From capture an audio book, a legacy, grandma's cookbook, right? An audio cookbook capturing recipes. They're all here. So we already tried to put together a little platform for you so that when you use it, it's easy to start, right? Because that's the most important thing, is getting started. I want to share with you Ann Tolson. Ann Tolson is talk about not knowing where people come from, right? And how people hold things in. We're going to play Ann Tolson's recording, and you're going to find this woman never told anybody what she did in World War II. So with that, if we could play that, please, Maureen.
This story is called Crisis Averted. It was very short. Most of my time in the Women's Air Force in England was spent in flying control tower of a Canadian bomber station in Yorkshire. We were a conversion unit, training pilots to fly 4-engine planes after they had done a tour of operations on 2-engine planes, Wellingtons and Halifaxes and Lancasters. Sometimes we had a stray aircraft returning from bombing with Germany diverted to us because it was in trouble and needed to land quickly, not get in the circle of planes waiting their turn to land at their own base. One night, I vividly remember getting a phone call from group headquarters telling us that one airfield was fogged in and that they were diverting the whole squadron to our base to land. It so happened that there was an officers' mess party that night, and as no night flying was scheduled from us, our duty control officer was also at the party. It was just me, Sergeant Watchkeeper, that's me, the Sergeant Watchkeeper, and a corporal RT operator, the two of us holding the fort at the tower. We'd never had the responsibility of directing our own planes down at night, let alone coping with 20 or 30 tired crews in aircraft from Germany, some perhaps in trouble. I phoned the officers' mess. I couldn't be heard about the shouting and singing that was going on. I knew that our control officer was fond of his drink and probably couldn't have managed it sober. However, somehow by screaming down the phone, I managed to convey that there was some kind of crisis going on in the control tower. In about 10 minutes, a crowd of about 10 arrived, from the group captain, station commander, to the duty officer, who was being cleverly covered by his friends. Just after they arrived, I had a call from group headquarters, which I handed over to the group captain to say that we could stand down, that the squadron was being converted somewhere else more convenient. An odd stray plane was fine for us, but a whole squadron with only 2 of us coping would have been a major problem. I think that even the group captain was relieved. I don't know if the party continued, but we closed down fine control for the night and went to bed. There were some lucky crews that night. They didn't know what they had missed.
Amazing. And her family didn't know. Nobody knew. And it's just so rewarding, right? Amazing. Maureen, if you don't mind, could I have the next slide, please? So for us, life story and changing the paradigm, we want to help change the paradigm for caregivers, for family members, for activity directors. And I want to share with you what I learned, and I hope I don't offend anybody here, but I really feel so strongly about this. Every place I go in, I sit down and talk to people, and the first thing that happens to me is they say, you know, no one really cares about me and no one cares about my story. And at first I really said, no, that's not true. But I've heard it over and over and over again. And it just really kind of breaks my heart. Because, you know, if you ask the right questions or if you get things started, everything changes. And I can't tell you how many times I've started with somebody by asking a question and they didn't want to talk to me. And then, you know, an hour later, we're still going. And I always say to them, I thought you didn't want to talk to me. You know, it's really hilarious. But really, I think the problem right now for so many places is that families are lost. They're really not engaged in the healing process of the joy of living. Caregivers, activity directors are overworked, and you're really underappreciated. And, you know, there are other issues with high turnover. And it's interesting because the part of this that really affected my life the most just recently, it actually changed my life. I walked in and sat down, and there was a gentleman sitting by a fireplace. And first of all, he acknowledged me as a young man, which I felt really good about. But he said, young man, do you know what hell is? And I said, no. He said, is meeting the person you wish you were before you die. To me, that it just knocked the wind out of my sails for a long time. And I wanted to be part of a solution. How do we help? How can I help you change things? And I know that the families need to be more engaged, but you can't be everything, right? You can't be the caregiver. You can't manage, you know, 25 people at a time and make sure that everyone's happy. So let's try to change the paradigm a little bit. Now let's think of ourselves as facilitators. You're kind of like the healing bridge or the tour guides for families to share the joy of living and not dying. And why do we want to do that? We want to discover a more soulful ways for families to heal, share, and celebrate really a priceless value of a human story, right? To comfort, inspire, teach, and entertain forever, for generations. And two, to enhance for you, the activity directors, more favorable caregiver ratings, favorable ratings from the families, because you deserve that, right? And so how can we do that? Let's think about a couple ways we can do that. One is a one-on-one. So I call it the one-on-one. The one-on-one is you use the voice library or whatever you use for storytelling or however you do it, but it's one-on-one, right? Somebody sits down with somebody, not you, not the caregiver, the activity director, a family member. We encourage a family member. I call it Uncle Tony. Everyone has an Uncle Tony in their life, which is a personal historian, right? That took the pictures and did that. Find that person in the family and have them capture the story. Have them come in or do it by phone, do it however, but you need to engage them to be part of the healing process. And everything starts to change from there, right? Everything does. So it's one-on-one, that sit down one-on-one, and they can ask that question and capture that story. But here's the other one that I find that is really exciting. So in facilities or caregiver environments, homes specifically, what we do is we create Grandma's Kitchen Table as an example we just did recently. What did you learn and what do you want to share? We had all the women, and then we did one for Grandpa's Kitchen Table, tell their story about what they learned from their grandmother and grandfather. It went into one library in the facility where outside family members were able to call in and listen and actually see the slides move through, but to hear the stories of, and if someone didn't have a grandmother, they could call in too, which was really interesting. But it was a huge hit, right? A huge hit all around. And what we want to do and what do we want to encourage is don't lose it there. Just say, okay, as you as the facilitators to say, next week, what's the story? Or maybe next 2 weeks, there's another story. Ask everyone to participate. Maybe give an award for the greatest story, right? It's just amazing. So there's one-to-one and one-to-many. There's so many ways to do that. And, you know, at the end of this slide is my information. Call me, reach out to me. I will help you do that. It would be my pleasure. I want to let you listen to Gail from Senior Helpers, who had something to say about just exactly what happened with her. If you don't mind playing that, Maureen.
Hi, Brandano asked me to share a few thoughts with you. This is Gail Davis of Senior Helpers. And at Senior Helpers, we have found that The family is critical to the healing process. The Voice Library is the only tool that allows our clients the ability to share their story, to chronicle the events of their life in their own words, in their own voice. This is the bridge, the connection between families that will live on. It's timeless. With the use of the Voice Library, we have seen the emotional state of our clients improve, thus the increase of their mood, and the tying the family in to the entire experience. We ask you too to consider using the Voice Library to enhance the experience and the life of your clients and patients.
Thank you. Maureen, can we go to the next slide, please? This is, I like to call it voice hugs, and that's really kind of what we do sometimes. You know, memories are fleeting, but stories are timeless. And we don't realize how voices really do kind of hug us. I want to share with you a couple funny, really funny stories that we used in Grandma's Kitchen Table that people called in and did. One is Grandma and Neighbor. Maureen, could you play that, please?
Sorry.
Neva would like to tell a story about her great-grandma, Nana. Where do you want to go? You just told me.
When we were at Nana's house, we had munchkins, and Nana was there, and we had to move the couch.
And what was under the couch?
All sorts of stuff, cranberries,
I don't know.
candy,
Andy.
wrappers,
Oh, goodness. And then what happened?
and then they had to move the couch and sweep it. So I went in Nana's room and saw the teddy bear because I loved it so much. The end.
Maureen, if we could play perhaps another one. Let's do Grandma's Goodie Bag.
So I'm sitting here with my mom. This is Eric Cacciatore, and we're reflecting on Lucille Brain, my grandmother, my mom's mother. And when I think about what I learned from my grandmother, it was just to be generous and to give and to always put other people first. She never forgot about anyone. She always remembered everyone. Whenever I was going to her house, she would always make sure the goodie bags were ready for all the kids. Every kid had a goodie bag, and if she forgot something, she would make sure to get something, to have extra, so nobody was left out. She was always so considerate and so giving with everything. What do you remember about that?
Yes, I remember when my children were little, and my mother always had goodie bags and stuff for everybody. But I also remember being a child and having older siblings. So when I was still at home and my siblings had grown up and got married and left, pretty much every Sunday was a day that they would come back home with their spouses and then children as the family grew. So it was always nice. And the family would connect every Sunday and be together and enjoy a meal and laughs and celebrate family and celebrate each other.
I mean, one thing I remember, whenever we went there, she always had something. She always wanted to make sure we were comfortable. She was a great host. Grammy always had ice cream. Grammy always had soda. Grammy always had little juice. What was it called? Juice boxes or whatever they were called, barrels. And she was just
All right, Maureen, if you don't mind, there's one I would really like to talk about. It's called The Thrill Seeker, Stephanie Hurt. I really want to share the background story on this. The Voice Library, we did a story, we did a project called Journey into Blindness. We did many projects, and if you go to our website, it's projects we love. When you see it, it's some amazing things there, but one we're the most proud of is Journey into Blindness, where young boys and girls in high school and younger were unfortunately have no sight or low sight, or usually from macular degeneration or something else, right, disease. And they were afraid of going blind. And what happens, we did this journey into blindness so that people who were blind, or older people who were blind, that experience for them was not going to be as frightful as they thought. And in this one, it's called The Thrill Seeker, Stephanie Hurt. It's a long one. I'll leave it up to you to listen to when you have some time. But I just want to start with the beginning part of it, only because for a couple minutes to understand the interview process that we talked about of using just the senses, right, to get started and get people comfortable. So if we could just play just a minute of that. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Brandano. I'm here with Stephanie Hurt in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We're here with our program for the National Federation of the Blind, New Hampshire. It's called Journey into Blindness. And Stephanie, thanks for talking with us today.
Oh, thank you.
How are you? So thank you for inviting me to your home. I really appreciate it. One of the things we're trying to do in this program is to really get to know a little bit more about you, because we know you're kind of a thrill seeker, as we know, we've been told. But anyway, let me start out. Where did you grow up? Are you from New Hampshire? Or?
No, I'm right over the border. I'm York Beach, Maine.
Oh, wow.
Not far. I grew up there my whole life.
Big family, or?
I'm the youngest of 4 daughters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm the only one with vision impairment.
And you were the baby, so you got spoiled.
Oh, yeah. I learned the ropes.
And the vision impairment, did that come earlier in your life or later in your life?
I was born with a rare degenerative eye condition, Leber's congenital amaurosis, or LCA.
Yes.
If anybody's familiar with retinitis pigmentosa, some people call it early onset RP. So I was always legally blind, but looking back, I feel like I could see quite a bit then compared to now, but I always had some vision loss. So I tell people I could ride a bike, I could play hide and seek and actually find people. So I have a good memory of what things look like. But now I mostly see what I call shapes on the wall.
Maureen, could we stop it here for a second?
And your family was the dynamic.
I want to just share with you, when you have time, it's an amazing story, but we use the interview techniques of smell, taste, touch, feel here. You'll get to hear it there. But I have to tell you, she's a parachuter. She's an amazing life. She's done many things, but one of the things she describes is parachuting as a blind person. And it is riveting. So when you have some time. The last one I'd like to leave you to is Lisa, who happens to be a caregiver, a professional in her own, owns her own company. And so I'd like, even though, we get lost in business sometimes, it's interesting to hear what happened to her, if you don't mind.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. There you go.
Let's try it again.
Hi, this is Lisa Byrne, the owner of Home Instead Senior Care for Central New Hampshire. Last year, my father passed away, and while everyone is aware that there's always the possibility of an elderly loved one passing, most folks, including myself, always think that the day is still far in the future and there's always plenty of time ahead of us. Well, when my dad died unexpectedly, my entire family was caught off guard. And like most families, after the services are over and the dust settles, we took on the task of going through all of his things and settling his affairs. And while we all thought we knew everything there was to know about my dad, we realized as we read and looked through a lifetime of collected odds and ends that there was so much more to the story than the one we knew. We longed to have back the lost opportunity for him to be the narrator of his own life journey. And it was then, I think, that I internalized just how valuable the voice library can be to bring his story to life. And not only for me and my brother and sister, but for all the grandkids and great-grandkids to come. And knowing my dad, I think he would have absolutely loved the process of telling this story and leaving it behind as a legacy. And although this opportunity is gone for my family, being able to give this gift to the families we serve at Home Instead Senior Care took on a whole new importance to me. And when our client families receive the voice library as a gift from Home Instead, at first they're surprised we're giving them a gift. And then when they learn that the recordings will be with their families always, even when their loved one is not,
They're grateful for the gift. We've had a client pass that had previously made recordings, and the family has reached out to express their appreciation to us. When that happens, it just solidifies for me that we're doing the right thing for the people we serve by giving them the gift of the voice library. And I hope you will too. Thank you.
And so one of the things I want to share with you is in the onboarding process. If somebody is joining you in your residence or as in a facility or whatever, it's something is, when nobody really gets a gift, right? It's a very difficult time, very stressful time. It's that onboarding time, right? Where they're not ready for it, right? But you can talk about it. And it's after that you can share this. It's part of the onboarding gifting process, so to speak. But the wonderful part about it is that it adds value forever, because even in a marketing way, what happens is the key times in their life, they listen to these stories and they think of you, right? You're the people who took care of them, the people who loved them, the people in hospice. I mean, you're always going to be on their mind and they remember that forever. So, and it's just an honor to be able to work in the industry with you. Every one of you, I don't know where your heart comes from. I don't know how you have anything else left over for all the things you give. So I'm so grateful from all of you. And I hope that we can provide you a tool to make your life and your patients' lives, clients' lives a lot more joyful. Before I leave, I want to let you know that there's a handout at the end of this. If you have any questions or you need to call me, please do. And you can check out the handout. The last thing we're going to do here, the next slide, is a project that Dr. Potts and us did together. It ended up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. We did it in a school. And it's maybe 2 minutes long, but it's really beautiful. So if you'll indulge me 1 more minute or two, please, Maureen.
Sorry. Alzheimer's disease. Almost 5.5 million Americans suffer from this illness, which of course there is no cure. A new project involving middle school students, though, is designed to help preserve on audio the members of these individuals that may one day be lost. Brothers 4's Edward Birch joins me right now. Now, Ed, students at Tuscaloosa Magnet School actually spent a part of their Thanksgiving with a recorder and talking to older people in their families.
Yes, capturing those memories. And the program is called Let Me Be Your Memory. And it's a project that's held in conjunction with National Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month. And the Tuscaloosa Magnet School is the first school in the nation to take part in it.
We will always have the interview at hand and also be able to share it with my other 3 grandchildren as well as his children in the future.
Louise Crawford loves sharing stories from her youth with her grandson, Brandon.
The many experiences that I had, and also the fun kinds of things that we did as children. We only had a radio, and he was amused that we would sit around and listen to Dragnet or whatever on the radio.
Memories like that is what the Let Me Be Your Memory project preserves. Students interview their relatives, record the conversation, and then upload the interviews to the Voice Library's archives.
Pastor of the church stood up and asked anybody to testify. She was saying, do you want to sing a song?
The project is part of the Tuscaloosa Magnet School's International Baccalaureate program. It focuses on interviewing and listening skills, in which students will publish the memoirs.
They're doing reflection papers in a formal essay writing style where they describe what they've learned.
LaBonda Wagenheim, International Baccalaureate Coordinator, says the project gives families the opportunity to learn more about one another.
It's just a good way for the older generation to have a voice, to be heard, and to store those memories in case the memory should never leave them.
These folks have a life story, and it's very important for them to both remember their life story and be able to express it.
This innovative project started as a joint venture between the Voice Library and Cognitive Dynamics Foundation. Dr. Daniel Potts, a neurologist and president of the foundation, says Alzheimer's is not a hopeless disease. Potts' father suffered from Alzheimer's.
The person's still there. This person may be losing their memory, They may not know what they had for breakfast this morning, but that doesn't mean that the innate human being is not still present.
For students Aaron Murphy and Lillian Wolf, the Let Me Be Your Memory project offered a new perspective.
It was eye-opening because I finally got to know more about her, even though I'm so close to her and I love her so much.
I realized how much we were the same when she was my age because the story took place when she was my age.
And there's so many stories that are online for these students that they recorded, just any little story about, you know, first date or the first movie they saw, first pet, anything like that. But anyone that is really interested in maybe learning a little bit more about this project, you can actually go online to www.thevoicelibrary.net. And again, the Tuscaloosa Magnet School is the only school in the nation that is doing this, but they're hoping to maybe expand a little bit. Other schools may learn this because it's a great project and a great way for students to learn a little bit more about interviewing, listening, and also to share in a little bit with their family.
And having a history that no one can ever take away.
Right.
Now, you mentioned going online. What if you don't have a computer?
Oh, that's exactly the point. They also have telephones where you can actually call in a recording. You can make a recording over the phone. You can archive and be able to go on or dial a phone number, dial in a username and a password, and actually be able to access the playlist so that all of the memories are on there and they can be accessed by phone. So if you don't have a computer.
That's terrific. What a great story. I hope every school joins in with that. That's
Absolutely.
wonderful. Thank you so much. Has Alzheimer's disease...
Did you want me to stop there, Al? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, ready to go with any questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're gonna advance forward and have Dr. Potts come back on for the final, and then we'll answer some questions, okay?
Perfect, perfect. Thank you.
I'm gonna move it. All right, can't see where this.
Well, I'm always inspired to hear of the way the human voice can have such an impact, and I appreciate your work so much, and thankful to collaborate with you. I will close this out here and just say we can advance to the next slide that we appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to let the voices of people living with Alzheimer's and their families speak to you through us today. I'll also say that one of the things that we do when we have art making collaborative events is that we will actually capture live story audio during those times. And so whether a student's working one-on-one with a person living with dementia, a lot of times they'll have their phone on capturing a voice memo from that. So it can be combined. So the live story material comes out in the creativity as well. I'll leave you with this, and again, we appreciate you letting us be with you today. So our friend named Anne lived with early onset Alzheimer's, and she was a part of our program. And we were doing an art project where we were using coffee filters and we're coloring them with watercolor markers, and having a great time. Anne was very flamboyant, and she was really getting into the art project. And you can see here all this color. We glued the filters on the paper, and we were just laughing and cutting up. But she traced her hand in the middle, and we were having so much fun that no one actually saw her write the words "help me" in the center of the painting. And so after we took her back to the other part of the facility and we were processing this, one of the students saw this and said, "Dr. Potts, look." And so we talked about this for about 20 minutes, about how we can surround, our folks with all the things that we're talking about. But there is a human being that may be hurting in the middle of all of that. And I think it's our duty and our calling to help that person get their story out, to preserve that story, and to use that story to show them back to themselves. So truly, it's an honor to be with you all today. Next slide, please. We thank you for the opportunity, and we hope that you will engage, this student did, engage the opportunity to spend some time with persons with Alzheimer's, as I know, Alzheimer's and other dementias, as I know you do, and learn their stories and share them with yourselves and to the world. Thank you so much on behalf of Al and me. for letting us talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Al.